We're going to talk today about the ransomware attack that started really on Friday last week, and it seems like a very long time ago if you've been without sleep. The question is, what is it? What happened? Is it over? Is there something to do about it? Am I in trouble? And those kinds of things. By way of introduction, my name is Anant and I'm the CEO here at EventTracker Security. We manufacture we're the vendors of a SIM solution called EventTracker and also a 24/7 service called Symphonic, which is based on that EventTracker product. So what really happened? Well, on Friday, May 12th, around 10:30, you can call it Black Friday if you like, because it was really a pandemic that hit globally. It began in the UK as far as we could make out. National Health Service, many hospitals began to turn away patients and ambulances because their systems weren't up. They were showing displays like the one that you see here on the right. Later in the day, it seemed to also go down to Spain, where Telefonica, a large telecom operator, reported these kinds of problems. It was also reported by folks in Russia. There was a train station in Frankfurt that apparently showed this display. The Spanish CERT issued an alert on this. And then the SANS Internet Storm Center noted that there was an increase in scanning on port 445. This is an internal port, typically that's used by server message block, or SMB, a protocol that's popular with the Microsoft Windows family. And the V1 of that is known to be vulnerable. In any case, it was being reported that a lot of folks had this ransomware, and this had echoes of CryptoLocker back in 2013, where these guys extort money from you and they make the payments big enough that you can feel the pinch, but not so large that you would just give up and say never mind. As of this date, there is no decryptor available, and so if you've been hit with this, it's difficult to say how to recover your files. Folks that paid the ransom, by the way, for what it's worth, did not receive any decryption key as yet. So that's what happened, and this was the trigger for the whole thing. Well, this thing really exploded globally. It was, as I said, a pandemic, and the speed with which it affected nearly 150 countries by Saturday was pretty stunning. Of course, it stands to reason that malware reverse engineering tactics were applied. A sample of the malware was obtained by one of the researchers, turns out to be a young guy in Britain. And he observed that within the malware, there were a couple of what are called kill switches, mechanisms to actually turn the whole thing off. It turns out that the malware checks if this domain that you can see here is reachable, yay, nay. And if it is reachable, why then it shuts down or it self-destructs. By the way, the malware is not proxy aware. So if it is inside your network and your network uses a proxy, even if this domain can be resolved, it still won't shut the malware down. The other thing that was observed was that it wrote to the Microsoft Windows registry. By the way, this malware is out and about attacking Windows machines that haven't been patched, as it turns out. So one of the things it does is it writes registry entries to Windows. And if it on startup discovers that the registry entry is already there, then it terminates. And so over the weekend, there were a couple of offerings from folks that offered to pre-infect you, as it were. If you ran their tool, then it would make these registry entries. Thereafter, if you happen to get the virus, it would check that the registry entry was there, and then it would exit. And that was a way of protecting you. Of course, very painful to do if you have hundreds of desktops in your enterprise, but that was another observation by reverse engineering the malware. As it turns out, that domain was registered as part of this effort, and that has caused the malware to become much less effective since then. So by the time the bulk of the United States woke up, this had already occurred, And so the damage that it could have caused, given the way it spread, was somewhat mitigated. Law enforcement has since swung into action. They've sinkholed that particular domain. That is to say, any attempts to resolve that domain are redirected to a server, and the person or the IP address of the entity that's trying to resolve it is recorded. At some point, they'll be back in touch with you to say that you're probably infected with WannaCry. As I said, the malware is not proxy aware. So if you are running a proxy, then it's on you to create an A record in your DNS server, have this domain be present, and redirect it to someplace harmless and record who comes asking for this to be resolved, because whoever comes, whichever IP comes, most likely they have a copy of that malware. So it appears that the spread of this particular strain, if you will, a V1 of WannaCry, appears to have been halted. And as far as we can make out from Saturday onwards, there hasn't been a V2. There were some reports that there was a V2, that someone had taken the malware and they had edited it in binary fashion to remove the kill switches. There was some suggestion that the kill switch had changed, but none of that appears to have taken root in a pandemic kind of way. You could make the mistake of assuming that it's over and there's really nothing to do and this was all a false alarm, but doing that would be a big mistake. It's only a question of time before something that's equally bad, if not worse, is going to show up. And so it's an important thing to try to learn, why did this pandemic take root? Why did it spread so quickly? How is it that it became a worldwide epidemic in virtually no time? I mean, these are some of the disadvantages of having a super connected society. It has its strong advantages, to be sure, but this is one of those challenges. And so one needs to learn everything one can from this. So how did it actually start to get around? That's actually still a little confusing at this stage. In the beginning, there were some reports that the malware, which is really a dropper or a loader, was propagating via phishing emails, the ones that you're probably familiar with. Your Amazon.com order is delayed, see the attachment for details, or one weird trick to get a bikini body this summer, click the attachment for details, all phony stuff, trying to encourage the user to actually click the attachment. So there was some talk that that was the way it was, but it's really not clear that that's the way at all. What's much more likely is that there were hosts that are exposing port 445 and accepting traffic to and from the internet, and this is how the worm has actually spread. Once it's inside your domain, it will spread laterally using these ports, which are generally open on the inside if you've enabled SMB or server message block version 1. This package is not just ransomware, but it's also a worm. The worm is the one that's causing the spread to occur at lightning speed, something like 200,000 infections in 140 countries in about 8 or 9 hours. That qualifies as a pandemic. So the worm is what's causing this to go around. The fact that port 445 is available. The ransomware piece is what encrypts the file and posts the ransom note that you saw in the previous slide. Like all ransomware attempts, there's an attempt to make the amount big enough that you feel the pain, but not so big that you'll say the hell with this. And then try to get a sense of urgency by saying that the price is going to double if you don't do something. As it's been noted many times before, this is an attack that will only be successful if the vulnerability that's described in MS17-10 is not applied, right? And this affects any machine that is running Windows from XP onwards, including the embedded POS Ready 2009 version. If you haven't applied this patch, then you're susceptible to it. Now, until Friday, the patch was available for Windows 7 and higher, because these are operating systems that are supported by Microsoft. On Friday, they made this patch available for Windows XP 2003 and 2008, recognizing that there are several machines out there on the internet that are still running these OSs, even though to get support for these, you're supposed to get a custom support agreement with Microsoft, which very few people have. Most are encouraged to upgrade. And there are, of course, those bootleg copies which are not eligible for the Windows update, that might also be at risk. So if you hadn't gotten MS 1710 applied, which by the way came out in March, so you had 55 days to apply it, but if you hadn't applied it and this worm is, and this ransomware, this malware is out and about, then that's when the damage can really occur. So operating a ISOC as we do, on Friday we were out and about hunting, looking at the indicators of compromise, and we found the infection in a bunch of places, one of which was a nonprofit that provides healthcare services in the United States. And what we saw was there was an instance of tor.exe. So what this malware does is once it gets on the machine, it unpacks a copy of tor.exe. This is the browser that's used for private communication. And then it uses that tor.exe to communicate with various known bad IPs. So what we found was that there was an unexpected instance of Tor, and this was coming really from the desktop of the user. And this was a clear indication, along with the fact that it was communicating with that IP address, that this was a case of infection. How it got there, couldn't really figure it out. Didn't really think it was there through phishing, as I've said before. It hadn't, in this instance, done any damage. Most likely it's because that domain had been registered. And so therefore the malware was able to self-destruct. But that is risky business. You're living on the edge. If your hope is that somebody else is going to take care of us all the time, then that's obviously not going to be true. The fix was that we had to quarantine the infected desktop and then ideally re-image it. And of course, you got to look around for any machine in the network that is vulnerable, that still has MS 1710 unpatched. It's also a good idea to limit traffic from ports 139 and 445, particularly, not allow them to go to and from the internet, because that seems to be the primary mechanism, to pick up this infection. So the lesson learned from this particular incident was that perfect protection is not practical. You could have antivirus, and in fact, at the moment, it is estimated that some 30% of all antiviruses out there will catch and prevent this from running, but not 100%. And that's also assuming that you had perfect updates going on. So we know from before that perfect protection is not practical, and so therefore a second line of defense, a third, a fourth, a fifth line of defense is necessary. Monitoring what is it that occurs, using endpoint detection techniques, and then also monitoring this thing actively. In some cases, we observed that the alert had fired, and it had been sitting in the alert console for hours. In some customers' cases, until that wasn't really picked up. So here's the challenge for us in defense, right? We implement any of these systems, and it fires alerts left and right. Well, what good is it unless someone's actually tuning it and actually watching it? So the upside of the symphonic service that we offer is that we actually watch it and then get to alert you. So in cases where we were able to do that, then the exposure of the customer to this damage was really much less. So the profit motive, everyone does this for money, right? You would assume that an attack like this, a pandemic that's hitting 150 countries, was in fact driven by the profit motive, but it really hasn't paid off for the guy. As of yesterday, 238 people had paid a total of $66,000 in ransom to the Bitcoin wallets. By the way, the fellow is obviously accepting money only in Bitcoin, and there are 3 wallets associated with this thing. And Brian Krebs and others have looked at how much money has been paid, and it's a trivial amount. As you know, law enforcement's already on the job. The long arm of the law at some point will nab this person or persons, unless of course they're a nation state, in which case it's entirely possible that nothing much is going to occur or happen to these guys. That's another point that's worth mentioning, is that we spend a lot of effort and energy as individuals worrying about attribution. Who did it? But as a defender, it's much more interesting to find out what is it that they did, what is the method they used, and protect ourselves from that method. Because even if the law finds this guy or these guys, if they turn out to be a nation state, it's possible that they can't actually get to them. So how are we going to do it as a defender? So I tend to focus a lot more on the techniques and the tactics than on the attribution piece. Now, as I told you, this is a vulnerability that affects only Microsoft Windows boxes that are unpatched. So what's Microsoft got to say about it? Well, they had released the patch for this back in March under somewhat funny circumstances. And I'll get to that in a minute. For anything that was Win 7 and higher, including the POS ready versions. On Friday, they also released publicly the update for XP and 2003. So if you have any of these machines, it's the most important thing to do is to go back and patch, because at least that will safeguard you from WannaCry. In blog posts, they were very critical of the NSA. As you might have heard, this particular exploit is occurring as a result of a weapon that was stockpiled by the National Security Agency by the name of Eternal Blue, and it exploited this vulnerability, the one that's patched in MS17-010. Sometime earlier this year, a trove of weapons was stolen from the NSA archives and they were released. And this particular attack is based on something that was released at that time. So Brad Smith, the chief legal officer at Microsoft, compared that horde of exploits that people like the National Security Agency have as essentially cyber weapons. And he criticized the NSA for hoarding them and then not necessarily revealing them to the vendors, and the fact that they allowed theft. There's been a lot of chatter about that. It may not surprise you to know that Vladimir Putin of Russia seems to agree with Mr. Smith and claims that it had nothing to do with them, that it was all the NSA. So you can make of that as you will. As I said, attribution is interesting for some people, but as defenders, that's not terribly interesting to us. So what are some of the technical details? How does this thing actually do its damage? Well, first of all, as I mentioned, when it starts up, it checks for this funny domain, and if it's reachable, it exits. And again, the malware is not proxy aware. And then if these keys are present, it exits. It drops an encrypted zip file. It uses a hard-coded password to actually unzip it, and it's really a loader. I mean, it's trying its best to avoid malware. So it writes a file to a disk. It uses an embedded key to decrypt this file. And then it uses a double pulsar to actually inject this into the running process. This way, it tries its best never to expose the WannaCry DLL to any kind of AV that you might have. It spreads laterally using the IPC dollar share, and this is one of the reasons why it's very successful. For a long time, when the NSA had this vulnerability, they were, according to reports that we're seeing now, stunned at the power and very careful to use it in a very, very controlled manner. As a matter of fact, Eternal Blue was for some time called the Eternal Blue Screen of Death inside the NSA, apparently, because of its tendency to crash the machine. Now, Blue Screen of Death is a familiar term for those of us that are familiar with the old Windows, but it's not something that you've seen or heard often since the arrival of 8.1 or 10.0. And so you see this attack being especially successful against XP in 2003. If you were doing Windows 8 or higher, or 8.1 or higher, then you had automatic updates turned on, then you got that fix. By the way, something funny, as I said, about MS1710. Back in January, it was announced that the NSA had been that these exploits had been stolen. This is back in January of this year. In February of this year, Microsoft, for the first time that anyone can remember, missed Patch Tuesday. I don't know if you guys remember that, but they missed Patch Tuesday. How can that ever be? They never ever missed it till then. And then in March, they came out with this fix, which they marked as critical. but not a whole lot of fuss was made about it. It was assumed that in the course of business, everyone would patch and patch quickly. Of course, that turned out not to be true for a variety of reasons, and thus the pandemic. And so what exactly caused Microsoft to miss it? No idea. Then in April, it was announced that shadow brokers had released this to the public. They tried to auction it off. They said they wanted 10,000 Bitcoins for it. They were going to release it to anybody that paid that money. That's about $8 million US dollars, that is. Nobody took them up on it. And then they released it anyway with a password. And those guys are out and about doing other kinds of stuff as it so happened. So there was something not quite normal, if you will. But be that as it may, Microsoft released the patch for all of its supported OSs back in March, and we as a defense community had more than 55 days to do something about this. So from their perspective, it's really on us. So those are some of the technical details. How does one stay safe? And this is not a something that's unique to this particular piece of ransomware, but this is generic advice. First and foremost, patch. If you're doing 90-day patch cycles in your enterprise, that's clearly not going to be cutting the mustard, if you will, right? I mean, in this case, we had 55, 56 days to patch. So if you're spending 90 days patching, then it's likely that stuff like this is going to continue to haunt you. Second is misconfigurations. If you've got them, they will come back and haunt you. There's no reason for 445 to be exposed to and from the internet. There was a scan done the other day by one of the vendors that said there are several million machines that they found sitting on the internet that have 445 open. You're sort of inviting trouble by this type of security misconfiguration. So clearly, don't do that. Even though this particular malware did not spread as a result of spam, as far as we can make out, spam is something that we have to deal with constantly. Also, admin accounts, handing them out like as though they're Halloween candy for convenience is a mistake, and least control, or rather least privilege, is something to pay attention to. I mean, a lot of this is motherhood and apple pie, nothing particularly new. But think for a moment, if you had no defense, if you had no patching, if you had nobody to turn to, if you had no mechanism, then you would be up on a Friday afternoon and possibly all weekend long trying to mitigate damage and then worrying about how to explain this upstairs. I mean, clearly career limiting moves and not something that we should take lightly. Macros in Office, it's obvious. That's been the source of attacks for some time. Not specific to WannaCry, but the phishing emails are getting very good at convincing you to enable macros. Last but not the least, it's the old saw that a perimeter defense, the traditional defense of having something on the perimeter, isn't going to cut the mustard. Hasn't really for some time. But this is another wake-up call, if you like, as to the fact that this business of putting a firewall down, sticking some antivirus down, declaring victory is well past its prime. I mean, there is no major attack that has occurred in the last 2 years that has been defeated by that type of strategy. And yet, as a community, we still place a lot of emphasis on these things and not enough on things like detection and response. Perfect protection, I'll say again, is not practical. If it's not, if you have stuff to lose, and we'll get to some of this by and by, but if you have stuff to lose, just having an old style perimeter defense just is not going to cut it. As I mentioned to you, we are a vendor that supplies a product called EventTracker, and it's backed by a 24/7 ISOC, intelligence-driven SOC called Symphonic. What have we done to protect our customers? Well, first of all, it's been pretty hectic keeping on top of all of the announcements and details from Friday morning, but that's our job and that's what we do. There have been a variety of info released by analysts and anti-malware folk commenting on this, technical details on how exactly it works, some of which I've shown you in previous slides, but there's a wealth of detail underneath, lots of lessons to learn. So we've been monitoring all of this in order to make sure we've understood what to look for, how would we recognize it, what are the clues, if you will. Because this thing's taking advantage of vulnerability, the first order of business was to look at those vulnerability scan reports and clearly identify anyone that was responsible for MS7 that had MS1710 unpatched, and make sure that we let them know. So in some cases in our customer base, we found this to be true on desktops. We found it to be true on critical servers. We were able to inform them, and they were able to patch and mitigate this damage very quickly. Again, it's very common that zero-day attacks get all the press, that they get all the attention, that they get all the headline inches, but it's very rare that they're the ones causing damage. Instead, it's these vulnerabilities that have been out and about for several months, for which a patch has been available, which is the one causing the damage. And that's clearly the case here. So one of the things to do is to make sure that you're patched up to the max. We developed various correlation rules, and we updated the active watch list. That's a feature in EventTracker. In the EventTracker instance that's serving you with these indicators of compromise. So various threat intelligence services put out, and some of them are very reliable, including the US CERT, IP addresses, domains that they were trying to touch, MD5 hashes, SHA-1 hashes, and other kinds of indicators of compromise that, if observed in the network, indicate the presence of WannaCry. So all of this has been updated into the active watch list. Alerting, because you remember there's that funny domain name that is attempted to be resolved. So if we're able to receive DNS logs from your instance, we're also looking into those to see whether there's any attempt to resolve that funny domain name, and if it is, which is the machine or the IP address that's asking for that resolution, so that we can make sure to track it down. I mentioned that there were registry changes that were done by the malware. So of course, examining the registry changes in order to see. So the way this malware persists is it writes stuff into the registry. So if you shut the machine down and bring it back up again, you'll still have that same ransom node. It does that magic by writing to the registry. So obviously, one other clue that you've been infected is to look for that registry key and any modification that have occurred to it. And that's really what the change audit function in EventTracker does. So that's another weapon. Last but not the least, the IDS component of EventTracker was updated with the latest signatures. There are some signatures that are available from the US CERT. There are others provided by emerging threats. There are still others provided by the SNORT folks. All of these were used in order to update the IDS and look at network traffic. As defenders, we really do have to give ourselves as many chances as possible to succeed. There is this view that is popular in the community that the bad guys have to succeed only once, but the good guys have got to succeed forever. And even one lapse by us defenders means we lost and they won. Well, I submit to you that that's an untenable position. If that's the degree of perfection to which we're being held, then we're inevitably going to fail. Instead, I say that the bad guys in fact lose, and lose very often. You know, I mean, take WannaCry as a for instance, right? There were hundreds of machines that were millions of machines that were patched, and therefore this was defeated. There were millions of machines where 445 was not exposed to the internet. They were defeated. There were tons of cases where you know, monitoring like the ones we're doing was able to catch it, identify it, and stop it from spreading any further. That's another win. So you want to give yourselves as many wins as possible. And as a matter of fact, you guys are all familiar with spam, right? Have you ever wondered why is it that spammers from Nigeria say they're from Nigeria? I mean, really, is there anybody in 2017 that thinks a prince is going to send them money if only they spend $5,000 back to cover the wire transfer costs? There's a specific reason why they do it, because they're trying to root out the people that are susceptible to this kind of thing and identify them, right? So it fails the majority of the time. So that paradigm that says the good guys have to win only once, the bad guys have to win, I'm sorry, the bad guys have to win only once, the good guys have to win all the time is not really accurate. Anyway, so if you are an EventTracker customer, oh, by the way, yes, we're also hunting continuously for these published IOCs. So in some cases, when we went back and looked 7 days and then 30 days in the past, we found some evidence that earlier versions of Tor.exe, earlier attempts at communication had occurred with these IP addresses in some customers, and we're following up on those to try to identify why that was so and can it possibly be legitimate, right? So before May 12th, if you had Tor.exe running, if you had communication with any of these IOCs, isn't that interesting to try and figure out why? Because presumably you're not allowing Tor in your network, right? Presumably there's no valid reason for these IP addresses to be communicating, right? And so if they are occurring before May 12th, what's that all about? So that's something else that's worth, and again, that's, having a service like Symphonic is essential in being able to catch that, because we will receive the logs, archive them, and be able to go back and do this kind of hunting. And this is all to the good in terms of protecting. Look, I mean, it happened. By the grace of God, maybe you weren't affected. You're going to just sit down and say, fine, nothing to do, move along. Well, if you do, then version 2.0 is coming at some point. 2.1 is coming at some point. Might not be so lucky. So do nothing is really the worst of all possible alternatives. Learning the lesson and closing the gaps is something that we must do all along. By the way, if you are an EventTracker customer and you don't subscribe to our vulnerability assessment service, then you want to pay attention to this slide. As you know, this malware is exploiting MS17-010, a known vulnerability. EventTracker Vulnerability Assessment Service is how we scan your network. We scan your network. It's a managed service. If you don't subscribe to this, but you are an EventTracker customer, we're happy to scan your network for free to let you know if MS1710 is unpatched. All you got to do is drop us a note, sales at, support at, ECC at, anything, to just tell us you want this, and we're happy to do it. There's nothing to install. We will connect to your network via VPN if you permit us, and we will scan internally all of the machines that we find. Anything that's Windows based, we'll look for MS1710. If it's there, we'll be happy to provide you the report and the details. If you are a customer and you're not taking this service, or you're not sure what your position is on vulnerability, please don't hesitate to take advantage. There's no commitment or cost on your side. So it happened. There is some suggestion that it's halted because of the actions of this of the defense community. Are we done? Nothing else is going to occur? Well, clearly the answer is no, right? This is, if anything, it's a wake-up call. Version 2.0 is surely coming. There's one takeaway from this that suggests that what you really saw was a trailer of the real movie, right? It's coming soon, if you will. Might it already be here? I don't know. We've been waiting for the shoe to drop. We thought, frankly, that Monday morning was going to release an avalanche and we were loaded for bear. It hasn't happened, but it's possible that it will show up with a different kill switch. It'll possible that a copycat might take this and do it with no kill switch at all, for whatever reason, right? So you need to think about what are the takeaways that you need to patch, that you need to make sure your security configurations are right. And then most important of all, you need to be sure that you're actively monitoring your network, because this stuff can in fact erupt. Now that actively monitoring your network part is the hard part, right? We know what to do. It's the doing it consistently, morning, noon, and night, doing it at scale for every endpoint in your system. That's very, very difficult. And in that, that's really essentially what Symphonic does. The service that we provide, which uses the EventTracker technology to do it. It's managed detection and response, it's SIM, it's vulnerability, it's intrusion detection, and we do also offer a honeypot for deception. You got to give yourself as a defender multiple chances to succeed. Don't buy the paradigm that if you can, if the bad guys win only once, then you're defeated and all your defenses are for naught. That's really not true, and you're certainly not alone. There are a lot of options available to you, including Symphonic. So what are some lessons learned? I'd say the most important lesson learned is that it's not over, that this was really a trailer, that we can absolutely anticipate that other attacks that leverage these vulnerabilities are going to occur. Michael Hayden, who used to run the NSA for a long time, and Keith Alexander, both of whom were in charge over there, have both said that the trove of secrets that was spilled to the public domain is a very serious problem, and that there are people with evil intent, whether they're nation states or whether they are for-profit type criminals, that will exploit it. I mean, guys, it's the NSA's job. They were using these to do their job. The fact that it's gotten leaked is a terrible problem, but it's a problem that's out there. This pandemic is going to affect us all, and so we need to treat this really as a wake-up call if necessary. The second takeaway is that the arms race is eternal, right? We as defenders get better, we adapt, but then the attackers get better too. I mean, it's been since 2001 that we saw a worm get out of control. If you remember back to Code Red or to Nimda or to Blaster, Code Red infected something like 360 machines in 14 hours. And that was nearly 15 years ago. Since then, the proliferation of broadband, the proliferation of connectivity, IoT, the number of IP addresses on the internet has gone up by orders of magnitude. And so you see something like this is coming out of our worst nightmares and keeping us awake. So it's an eternal race. It's not that we're done, that we're finished. We are certainly adapting. Defenses are a whole lot better than they were 15 years ago, but so are the attackers. So this is going to continue on. That's another takeaway. The third one is that for the first time in global scale, we as defenders felt that collaboration was extremely helpful. We were all in this together. Cisco wasn't hiding info, nor was Kaspersky, nor was Microsoft, nor was the US CERT. Everyone was out and about publishing. What are we seeing? What are we doing? The collective power of all of those security brains was harvested and disseminated. It was extremely helpful. Look, I mean, everyone has their role to play in the drama. There are some that do the reverse engineering. There are others that actually take the results of that and go administer and secure networks. There are yet others who manage and provide the framework for all of this to occur. So you really saw all of them come together. The media had its role in alerting people to the fact that this is out and about and people need to be vigilant. So collaboration amongst the good guys was really helpful, and this is something to be happy about in 2014. What to do? Well, keep calm and carry on. That's a common phrase in the UK. Carry on in the sense, keep updating. There is really no choice to this. Keep monitoring. I mean, eternal vigilance, right, is the price of liberty. That's clearly the case here. So that active monitoring, the ability to keep looking at what's out of ordinary, what's wrong, what's strange, what's odd, what's unpatched, that's an extremely critical thing. As we depend on our IT, that's something that we have to pay attention to. And of course, keep improving. It's true for the bad guys. They're collaborating. Well, the good news then is that, frankly, so are we. If you're interested in details and you're not protected, Symphonic is the service that I've been mentioning throughout. You can get protected from this wave, and what is inevitably version 2.0 might be called something other than WannaCry, with our service which is called Symphonic Managed Detection and Response, or Symphonic MDR. It's pretty easy to do. If you go to our website /prevent-ransomware, you can get a hold of the lightweight sensor and get your monitoring started right away. If you are an existing customer, I really do encourage you to please take advantage of the vulnerability scanning service if that's something of interest. So, as I mentioned before, there is a chat window on the top right. I see some questions, but if you're interested in asking any or a comment, please feel free to do so. So let's see now. Someone's asking who's behind the WannaCry campaign. Well, frankly, it looks very much like a criminal campaign, and it looks like it's financially motivated. Of course, the execution seems to have kind of stumbled. The ransom is saying send money to Bitcoin. There are wallets set up for that purpose. Not a whole lot of money has been deposited there, as you saw. So it certainly looks like it's a criminal campaign with finance as the motivation. I say again that attribution is a mug's game. What do we really care? I mean, I understand that we all want to know who's behind this campaign, but even if I were to tell you specifically that it's Ivan the Terrible and he lives here in Moscow or whatever, what are you going to do about it? It's not like you or I can reach out to that guy and shut him down or tell his mother or anything of that sort. So then why do we really want to know? At one level, it's useless as a defender. At another level, it's extremely interesting to us as individuals. For what it's worth, there has been speculation by Kaspersky that this is the Lazarus group. They looked at code samples and said, it looks similar to what we saw in February. Lazarus group, of course, you might remember from the Sony Pictures hack, right? You might remember them as the guys that were behind that looting of the bank in Bangladesh, where a bunch of money was rewired using a SWIFT terminal. The Lazarus group is thought to be part of North Korea. Is it true? Don't know. But those are some thoughts that are out there and speculation that's out there. Again, my preference is to focus on the vulnerability, on the defense that we have to do, not so much on the who did it. I mean, we're vulnerable because we didn't patch, we couldn't patch. We're vulnerable because we're not monitoring. We saw maybe the alerts but didn't pay attention to them. That's more interesting than who's behind it. But anyway, that's something. Another question. Why was there a kill switch? So it did have a kill switch. Everyone's looking into the ransomware and they are trying to figure out why. Now, what we do know from the old days is that kill switches were used by people that wrote worms. This is 15 years ago. In order to be able to dismantle the malware, the author wanted some degree of control over the malware. If it got released into the wild, if it really went wild, they wanted some mechanism to turn it off. I mean, you remember at some point even Tony Stark couldn't shut Ultron down, right? It wasn't a question of just pulling the plug, but when the Frankenstein's monster takes the creator over, then that might be the case, but it's still speculation. Attackers can, of course, hijack the kill switches. They can mutate the code. They can remove the kill switch. You know, if the kill switch is hijacked, then somebody else can alter the code, right? So that Bitcoin then goes somewhere else instead of to the original guy. The fact that WannaCry was so widespread and that it was so indiscriminate, it spread everywhere, to every country, to every vertical, to every machine that was out there, that, you know, it's possible that the attackers were really serious about containing their attack code. It could also be that that they aren't really very skilled, that they left it in there by mistake, and they were less attentive to this than an expert Moriarty type criminal. Let's see. Question is, did anyone get their files back by paying? That's a question. The answer is no. Frankly, nobody seems to have gotten, even though some 238 people as of yesterday appear to have paid ransom, nobody's gotten their files back. There is no known decryptor yet at this stage. We don't know of any mechanism to get back these files if they've been encrypted. How does it compare to Code Red is the question. Yeah, Code Red is an oldie from 2001. It was also a worm. It also got out of hand really, really quickly. So it's comparable in the sense that this is a worm also. But this was also virulent. That too was against a known Microsoft vulnerability. Here, the vulnerability patch had been available for a while. There, it hadn't yet been. But it was very reminiscent of Code Red or Nimda or Blaster in terms of its pandemic-like effect. Let's see, question, does antivirus stop Yes, some do. There's a report out there from somebody that suggests that 30% of the antivirus suites out there were stopping this as of Saturday. Of course, that number has no doubt gone up as all of these companies are very alert, very active. I guess the bigger question is going to be, is your antivirus signature up to date on every single machine in your network? If it isn't, that's something to pay attention to. Let's see, one other question is there going to be litigation around this? It's possible. There's a growing sense that there are third parties that might maybe sue the organizations. For instance, should the NHS and National Health Service, NHS, in the UK taken better measures to protect themselves given the fact that the patch had been available for 55 days? It's possible that there's going to be some litigation by third parties. It's possible that we're going to find that budget-starved people have continued to use out-of-date OSs like Windows XP, and for which a patch was not available until Friday. So clearly some litigation is going to occur. Will Microsoft be the target of this type of litigation? It's possible. You are unlikely to see Microsoft being the target because Microsoft's likely going to point out that the affected organization was either running unpatched software or they were running unsupported software. So maybe Microsoft gets attacked, but it's not clear. Let's see, one more says, if I sign up with EventTracker Managed Solution, how long will it take for me to be protected from things like WannaCry? Well, it's really practically the same day. The sensor that's available at prevent-ransomware.com will begin interacting with the EventTracker console, and any unknown, unseen executables or DLLs like the WannaCrypt DLL will be reported back to you by the software right away. So your delay in getting started is negligibly small. Well, folks, that's what WannaCry was all about. I understand that taking an hour out of your day is a lot to ask. If I've missed any questions, please feel free to ask. Oh wait, here's one. My workplace has to use 445 and 993. Will SSL certificates give us protection, or should we switch to 139 and 445? SSL certificates will certainly give you a degree of protection. It's if you're indiscriminately accepting connections to and from 445 is the challenge. Let's see, another one says, pervasive legacy systems are still running XP, tech support has ended. What are your key recommendations based on your products to be preemptive, proactive in protecting them from threats similar to WannaCry? Well, that's an excellent question. I mean, it can be that you're in a position where you are using XP or you're using 2003 and for some reason it's not possible or not practical for you to abandon these machines. It's possible to be safe using XP where maybe the patches are not available. But then you have to have so many other things also go wrong, right? I mean, you have to have 445 be vulnerable. You have to have SMB v1 be vulnerable. You have to be running an antivirus that at the time wasn't catching that sort of stuff. You had to have 139 open inside your network. If any of these things were not true, then the power of that malware was maybe affected. So if you can't say goodbye to XP and you can't afford the super fancy custom support that Microsoft is demanding from you, then you should take care about network configuration. You should think about investing in MDR solutions like Symphonic, which will alert you. They certainly do work on XP. They certainly do work on 2003. We have several customers that are DoD that use that. There are several that are embedded in the POS systems that still haven't managed to get themselves upgraded. It's easy for us to be on a high horse and say, oh, you shouldn't be using this, but reality bites. What can you do? So in those cases, something like an MDR can be very helpful to get you to get going, or to get you to be protected. See, another one says, if you're already a SIM subscriber, who do I reach out to in order to be enabled scanning for the MS patch? So yeah, you can just reach out to support@eventtracker.com, and they will be happy to get you going in terms of taking advantage of that offer. How much, Rob says, how much is that fancy support that Microsoft is offering? It's one of those deals, unfortunately, that if you have to ask, you probably can't afford it. It's crazy expensive. It's really meant for folks that have DoD style money coming, or black budgets coming out of their ears. Is it possible to get? Yes, there are some enterprises that have done it, but frankly, unless it's some real solid reason, it's probably much cheaper and simpler for us to just upgrade. Is tor.exe a common process used in launching malware? As a matter of fact, it is, Scott. There are some legitimate reasons for tor.exe, but Tor is usually used for machine-to-machine communications, and you rarely see humans. Yeah, there are some super sophisticated types that do it, but it's worth asking the question if you've got those super sophisticated types in your organization. If you don't, then it's probably not meaningful inside your enterprise. When choosing a host to infect via port 445, how were IP addresses chosen? Was there a pseudo-random number generator deployed? Is this something like SQL Slammer at the turn of the century? Yes, it is somewhat like Blaster from the turn of the century. You're right. There wasn't a random number as far as we can make out. This thing was reaching out inside the network to anything that it could find. And so if you had network scanning going on inside, then you'd see elevated instances of port 445 traffic originating from some one machine. In fact, on Friday, what the SANS Internet Storm Center reported was an increase in port 445 traffic on the internet. That means there were people, or there were instances of WannaCry that began to scan outside their networks even, because 445 was allowed to go out, right? And that's what tipped the SANS people off. So if you were paying attention to the ISC, then on Friday they released a, I wonder what that's all about. Why are we seeing suddenly 445 traffic on the big I internet? They don't obviously have visibility inside your network, but they're looking outside, so that's what they saw. And this thing would try and find, like a good little worm, anything and everything that it could find. By the way, it was never really looking inside your machines for passwords, inside your files for passwords. So it wasn't trying to catch your contact list and send it to everybody that was in your car, because this wasn't really done through email. It was done over the network. Let's see, what else? Outside the cost of ransom, do you have any data on the cost to organizations that were infected? Yeah, so then the Ponemon Institute does this study regularly every year for the last maybe 7-10 years on the cost of data breaches and what happens if one of those gets loose. And the way they compete, it's not quite the same thing, because they're worried about exposing data. Here, there isn't any data to expose. It just sits there and encrypts. What we know from previous ransomware attempts is that the costs add up in various buckets. It's the cost of downtime, so your business gets affected. It's the cost of reputation. Word gets around that you got attacked, everyone's all of a sudden very nervous. For a long time, people were nervous to put their credit cards out at Target, because the thought was, if I do this, will my card be stolen? So there's the cost of that. There's the cost of getting the experts in to try to look at it and clean this up. There is the cost of fines, possibly. If it turns out that you weren't compliant and you attested that you were, then you might get that. And then, of course, there's the cost of potential litigation. In all of this, all of these costs add up to significant numbers, much more than just the annoyance or the, I'll pay the $300 and I'll get out of it kind of thing. Let's see. I joined the webinar a little late. What does Symphonic do? How would it help my organization? Symphonic is essentially a service that's built around EventTracker, the SIM solution, and it helps to monitor your environment and keep you safe from these kinds of threats, and also to offer regulatory compliance support. We are a medium enterprise with hundreds of servers, thousands of workstations. Is the MDR solution on the screen right now suitable for us? Yes and no. We offer the solution, the Symphonic solution, in two flavors. For those that have basic needs and those that have advanced needs, the MDR solution is suitable for those who have basic needs. For ones that have advanced needs, we offer a Symphonic Enterprise where the coverage can be customized and tailored to your particular environment and made to be as correct as possible for the different applications, locations, the service level agreements and so forth that your enterprise demands. For many organizations that have basic needs, they may be very large indeed, have thousands of workstations, it's entirely possible that the MDR service could suffice. I mean, think for instance a distributed enterprise that has hundreds and hundreds of locations, relatively small ones and relatively standard ones, as you typically see in the franchisor operations. These folks have very cookie cutter type installations, but they have hundreds if not thousands of such locations around the globe, and you need a industrial strength solution to solve it. However, it's not that each location is completely new and has all kinds of infinite variety. So in those cases, the need turns out to be basic, but needs to be industrial strength and highly scalable, and something like Symphonic MDR will be the perfect solution for that kind of thing. All right, I'm going to look at some other questions. By the way, if I did not get to your question, I will surely get back to you as soon as I finish up here. There's a question on Symphonic costing, and I'll refer you to our sales team. Suffice to say that the costing is frankly a small fraction of the damage. If this were to attack you, if this were to cause your enterprise, then all of those buckets, you know, the loss of time, the loss of reputation, the punitive fees, if any, the lawyer fees, the incident response fees, frankly, the cost of Symphonic would pale in front of those kinds of costs. And so therefore, it's something to think about very seriously. All right. So we're 2 minutes before the hour. I really do appreciate you all taking the time to listen and for all of your excellent questions. Thank you for your attention. Again, like I said, you got to keep calm and carry on. And so for all of you, here's wishing you a safe 2017. Thank you, guys. Talk to you soon.